And so this gives her a moment to, where the guy's hand is not over her mouth, it gives her a moment of freedom, and she screams at the top of her lungs. And he proceeds to, according to her, grab her by the hair and drag her on his board, mind you. They're floating. He's dragging her. And then eventually at some point he lets her go, realizing he's not going to be able to get away with her. And at this point, the villagers are on them. And remember, they're sort of down in a gully. So the neighbors are now there with their flashlights. They see Talia laying there on the ground, bloodied up. They see the assailants floating on their platforms. The brothers there, there's a handful of them on scene. They see these guys at close proximity, the perpetrators. They're at the scene of the crime. And the assailants, they maneuver themselves on their circular platforms. They maneuver themselves to where it's not heavily forested above, and they shoot up into the air and escape.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast. Tim Alberino, author, explorer, fresh off an expedition, and dating website app startup. Tech. He's turning into a techie, Luke.
I think it's just more think tank. I think yeah.
Just for you though. Just for you, Nate. It's just one guy on that website.
Man.
It's you.
It's well, date Big Red.
For only $99 a month.
Big Red.
Tim will sort through your application. But
I collect the money, and ladies get to go on a date with you. It's very lucrative enterprise for me.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
This is a joint venture. But Tim, we had you on here right before you left for Peru. A lot of that was to provide some cover, if you will, for your trip, because there's a lot of danger there. You're 18 hours up the river in the jungle. Didn't know what was going on up there. Of course, if you're tuning in now, go and listen to the first part we did with Tim. Was before he went to Peru. If you're unfamiliar with this, you may need some prerequisite knowledge. There's been some crazy stuff that happened over the summer in Peru. Face-peeling aliens was the initial story that came out, and then, of course, the media there squashed it, and it was miners with jetpacks. But what we know and what Tim went to investigate was that there was something very odd happening about 18 hours up the river in the remote Peruvian jungle, and it needed to be investigated. And so, Tim, just to kind of recap our last episode, you partnered with folks we know, including Conduit Church here in Franklin, Tennessee, where we had our Blurry Con to do some humanitarian work down there. You brought medicine and food to the villagers that had been terrorized and really going through a bunch of crazy stuff there. And additionally, you provided equipment for them, and you went to investigate. You are the tip of the spear when it comes to this. And so when you're not switching out golden idols for bags of sand, you're up the river in Peru, investigating what's really going on with the face-peeling aliens. And we're great to have you back. I know that it's been a whirlwind since you got back. You launched your video on YouTube. That's exploding all over the internet. You can check out what Tim's doing on Twitter. Of course, the video's on YouTube where he recaps. This is an audio show, but in that point, it's a lot of visuals that he shot with him and his team down in Peru. And if you're not familiar with Tim Alberino, you've been under a rock for the last few years, but Tim spent some time, lived for more than a decade in Peru. And we actually went with Tim to Peru in June on a Blurry Creatures trip, where we found out that every alpaca in that country hates Nate Henry, among other things. But Tim, and I know you're just on really a layover at home before you head out again. But thanks for coming back, and we're excited to hear what you found and kind of just lay out what you believe is really going on down there in the wilds of Peru?
Well, I left on the 23rd. I did a show with you guys right before I left, and I wanted to make sure that we had cover. And what I mean by cover is, on this kind of a trip, sometimes you want to go in covertly, sometimes you want to make a lot of noise. On this trip, I wanted to make a lot of noise because I was nervous about perhaps there being some sort of a deep state, dumb state connection here to what's going on in the Peruvian Amazon. In other words, human actors with advanced technology doing very nefarious things. So I didn't want somebody to put a bullet in my head and drop me in the river and nobody know that I was out there. That was the strategy there. And apparently it worked. But I left on the 23rd. I was in Peru until the 1st of November. I just got back. I got home on the 2nd of November, so just about a week ago. And I was accompanied by my friend Doug Thornton, who wanted to go with me and who we wanted to do a very covert sort of filming. We wanted to be very low profile. I did not intend to go in there and make a documentary or anything like that. That was not the objective. But I did want to take some video and be able to produce a very simple video when I got back, take some footage and create a simple video when I got back, which is what I did. That's published on my YouTube channel. So Doug Thornton was able to film a lot of what we were doing there. And yes, initially I was going to go by myself, and then Doug wanted to go, and I was very relieved that he wanted to go because I don't film stuff myself. I don't like to film anything. So if anything's ever going to get filmed, someone's got to go with me and film it. So Doug offered to come and film, and also Doug's infantry Marine and XDHS. So I was very happy to have him with me. And then also the objectives of the expedition were obviously to go and investigate. When I contacted the village and found out what was going on and what kind of situation they were now in, a secondary objective became to provision the village with food, medicine, and strategic technology. And in that endeavor, I want to thank the guys at Conduit Church, Pastor Darren Tyler, Jamie Brandenburg, and the group of guys Todd Smith and the group of guys that got behind me to help me finance that part of the operation. I could not have taken on the full financial burden myself. It wasn't cheap to go out there and do that. I had to charter a riverboat. I had to hire security. I hired 2 active duty Navy commandos, jungle commandos out of Iquitos. They were my security detail. Again, we had no idea what we were walking into. And so I wanted to take every precaution.
It's like a blurry missionary, like out there, like taking the gospel and machetes and
let's be honest, the only reason the Navy guys went, Nate, is because you and I were unavailable. I mean, top flight security.
That's right. They're afraid of large beards in the Amazon, so you guys were my first choice.
Hey, they would have been scared.
I love it. No, Tim, we got a chance to talk to you when you got yourself out of the jungle.
Yeah, let's tell the story, Luke. We get this phone call the other night. Tim called us first. He called us from Peru and began to tell us the story. So I wanted to kind of recapture that moment here on the podcast. So What did you find out, Tim? I mean, we all kind of know the story of you going in there, but
as I said before, we didn't know what we were going to discover. We didn't know if we were going to discover some sort of an alien phenomenon, some sort of a human phenomenon, or that the native people there, the villagers, were making the whole thing up. So we went in prepared for whatever kind of reality would present itself, including miners with jetpacks. I mean, we didn't know what to expect. And when we got there, what we discovered was probably the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is not aliens. The worst case scenario is nefarious human beings with advanced, probably alien tech doing very evil things. And it became apparent to us very quickly that this was something extraordinary. It was absolutely real. We began to, first you'll see, and if you go and watch my video on YouTube, on Timothy Alberino is the name of my channel. We were invited to the village after I contacted the village of San Jose. It's called San Jose de Pintuyacu. Pintuyacu is the river it's located on. San Jose, it's like a 2-day river trip from Iquitos. You're going northwest of Iquitos, a little bit north, but west of Iquitos, and way deep in the Amazon. When you get to Pintuyacu, the river Pintuyacu, and then to San Antonio. There's really nothing after San Antonio. It's uninhabited jungle, basically. There's a couple of there's one more little village on the river Pintuyacu, but after that, it's just the vast expanse of the Amazon, the northern Amazon.
Why here, Tim? Why do you think it's happening here?
I don't know. That's one of the things I was hoping to elucidate when we were there. But so this is a very remote location. But because it's the San Antonio de Pintuyacu is the original village of the Iquitu people. The Iquitu people are a very old tribe. They're hundreds of years old, and they've been living in this region of the jungle for centuries. And this was their capital village. It's not very large. It's large compared to some of the other ones, but it's only got about 200 inhabitants. But it's very historic. They speak the Iquitu language in this village, the elders do, and that language is almost completely extinct at this point. So it's a very important, anthropologically speaking, it's a very important village. And because of this, and also because it's sort of the last outpost for civilization before you go into this vast wilderness, the government put a communication post there. So there's a little government building called the Tambo, which it's for the villagers, but it's a government outpost, and they have satellite internet in this one building, and they have a generator, and so they have some lights, which is very unusual this far out in the middle of this far out in the Amazon. So it's a very interesting place. We went up the river. I chartered a riverboat, and it was a Peruvian crew, 6 guys, plus my 2 security guys, my security detail, Doug, and 3 of the villagers from San Antonio de Pintuyacu accompanied us up the river, including the Apu. The Apu is the chief of the village. He's 32 years old. His name is Jairo Reategi. And Jairo and the other leaders of the village gave me a formal invitation to come to the village. They were very excited to receive me. They knew I was coming to investigate. I learned very early on that no one had gone to investigate in the village. I reported, in my initial reporting of the incident, I said that the Navy went to investigate. That was false. That's what the media was saying. But Jairo told me that no, only 2 police officers went. They were accompanied by the Navy, piloted them up the river. They ferried them up the river in a Navy boat. And the police officers were accompanied by 2 Navy guys with automatic weapons, but only the police officers, these 2 guys, conducted an investigation. The Navy never officially conducted an investigation in the village, which I was quite surprised to hear that, because all of our media was reporting here in the United States was reporting that they had. And I also was parroting that. It was wrong.
Real quick, why do you think that is? Because a story that got so much international attention, right?
Because they don't believe them.
All right.
They don't believe them. And I know that because I met in Lima. So backing up before I went to Iquitos, I spent a day in Lima, which is the capital city of Peru, and I met in Lima Hugo Cusato, who is the professor of the Navy War College. He's a professor at the Navy War College in Lima. Very well connected guy, very intelligent guy, awesome dude. And I met with a Peruvian hero, Admiral Carlos Tejo, and everyone knows Admiral Carlos Tejo in Peru. He's retired, but he was one of their most illustrious admirals because he was instrumental in eliminating the Shining Path, the communist uprising, the Shining Path. They were a terrorist organization. They killed a lot of people, especially in the jungle. And it was very violent. And Admiral Tejo was, as I said, instrumental in eliminating that organization. And part of the way he did it, by the way, is he famously he would take the commies in a helicopter and fly them up in the air and push them out. That's how he would deal with the commies. And so because of that, he's not allowed in the United States. Crimes against humanity. He was pushing commies out of helicopters. So this is the guy that I met with in Peru, Admiral Tejo and Hugo Cusato, and both very, very intelligent men. And we sat down, had dinner with them. And obviously my line of inquiry with these gentlemen was what they thought. I wanted to know what they thought about what was unfolding in the Peruvian Amazon in regard to the alleged alien attacks, a face peeler phenomenon.
Yeah.
And they kind of rolled their eyes. And in fact, Admiral Tejo, his very first response was, "Well, these jungle people aren't very well educated. They really don't know what they're talking about. They're very superstitious." And he proceeded to tell me that he thought that what was going on was something like narcos or river miners or somebody else was draping a sheet over a drone or something like this and flying it around like a ghost and scaring the villagers. That was his assessment. Ugo really couldn't speak to the affair. He doesn't really know what's going on, but he sort of agreed with Tejo, with Admiral Tejo. Well, that was it. That was their assessment. And I said, well, okay, but the problem is that this is the Amazon. It's at nighttime. These things are moving between the trees. They're confronting the villagers up close and personal. They're being shot at. I said, how do you explain all of these details? And he didn't know how. He said, well, that's interesting. I don't know what to think about that, but the natives are probably not understanding the technology that they're confronting. In other words, it's just conventional technology that they think is aliens. Okay, that's what they said. I was a little bit surprised by that low resolution analysis because I've lived with these people. I know these people. They're not stupid. They know what drones are. They watch movies. A lot of these people go down to Iquitos, these villagers, they'll go down to Iquitos, and they all have cell phones now, and they'll watch movies. They're not stupid. They know what technology is. They know what drones are. So I was a little disappointed with that assessment. Okay, so we're going up the river, and again, I found out that we were the very first journalists, quote unquote. I don't know that I would consider myself a journalist, but I guess I was conducting a journalistic enterprise here. I went up the river, and we were the first ones to go to this village to actually investigate.
It's wild. That's
beside the police. Now you will see some interviews online with the villagers, but those apparently were in. Two things are happening there. Most of the ones that are with journalists, those are in Iquitos. The villagers came down to Iquitos. They're being interviewed in Iquitos, the main city in the jungle. By the way, you can only get to Iquitos by boat or air. There are no roads that go there. It's the most isolated city in the world, one of them at least, certainly in the Amazon.
So wait, you're telling me where you were going? You don't need roads?
You can't get there, but is this a reference to something?
What did they say? Okay, so Tim,
okay.
What did they say about some of those pictures that were circulating on the internet? Are those legit or?
Okay, so let me finish my thought, and then I'll talk about this. So the first thing is that the journalists that you see online talking to whoever, those are in Iquitos. And then when you see someone's talking to Talia, the girl who was nearly abducted, and talking to people in the village, that's a guy named Christian. He is from the village. He's not a journalist. He's from the village. He took the videos. He did his own little interviews with people and put it up online. And I've been in contact. I'm still in. I talk to Christian all the time. So that's Christian. He's from the village. Okay. So I don't know about these images that are popping up that allegedly come from the Amazon, the ones of these bright beings. Yeah. I don't know anything about that. They don't know anything about that. I cannot verify that those are real. It seems to me that these are probably not authentic, but I don't know. I have no knowledge of whether or not they are. The FacePeeler stuff, people were the guys missing his face. I think we talked about that. A guy was discovered. His face was gone. It was just bleached bone. It was not piranhas. It was a very clean cut. Piranhas don't do that. Piranhas are, as everyone knows, they're very aggressive. They nick the bone and they tear the flesh up. They don't leave a nice clean cut.
Yeah. It's not a surgically removed face.
Right. The nature of their teeth, they tear things apart. It's not a surgical cut, a piranha bite. So this individual was found this year sometime, and these guys confirmed to me in the village. Now, this is what they say. I haven't been able to independently verify it. They told me in the village that happened. We all heard about it. It happened in the same region of the jungle. That one's real. And apparently it has something to do with the FacePeeler phenomenon. Also, there was a boy whose neck was cut up really bad. It's in the whole thing. I posted on Twitter. The whole thing is very, in Peru, when there's an accident or something, like in the jungle, they show it. They only blur it the media, the Lima media organizations have to blur, but when it comes out of the jungle, they show everything. So you see people like with their arms ripped off and heads ripped off from motorcycle accidents. They just put it on TV there. And this video has been circulating of a boy with 2 very large lacerations in his neck, like huge open wounds. He's in shock. He lost a lot of blood. Thank God the boy survived. That also is real, and ostensibly has something to do with the face peeler phenomenon. So those 2 I can tell you are real, and both of them are associated with the face peeler phenomenon. The picture of the luminous beings, I don't know.
Yeah. So, Tim, unless you have more there, I was going to ask you about Talia, because of course that's the other one, the big story that came out, right? Was her story about being abducted and they attempted to peel her face, and we talked about this when you called us from once you got out of the jungle, but that's fascinating because a lot of people discredited that story, right? And or
that story's real.
Story at the very least.
That story is very real. So when I got to the jungle, I'll lead up to Talia. Right. When I got to the village, remember, I've got the chief of the village with me on the boat. I'm greeted by a small army of village men with shotguns, and they're all standing on the shore, and we pull up in this riverboat, and we harbor there right next to the village, and they're very formal, so they wanted me to give like a speech when I got before I disembarked.
There you go.
Which I did, and all the guys are cheering and clapping and like inviting me to come into their village. And by the way, these are not like natives in grass skirts. These are people wearing regular civilian clothing. In fact, Talia, as I was interviewing her, she had this big pink TikTok shirt on. These are civilized people, even though they are members of the Iquitu tribe. They are civilized people, so they still have all of their old customs and stuff, and even their old language. But they wear clothes. Let's put it that way. So I disembark after I give this little speech. I disembark, and they lead me to, and you can see all of this, by the way, in my video. They lead me to the Tambo building, that government building. When I got there, a lot of the village was already assembled there, waiting for us. And we had a very warm reception there. And they unloaded all of the supplies that we brought them and piled them up inside of the Tambo. And once again, they asked me to give a speech. So I did. I introduced myself and my team and the Navy guys who were with me and the crew on the boat and all of that. And then I explained what our purpose was in the village and basically asked permission from them if we can interview them and have them tell us what's been unfolding in the village. And they were more than happy, clapping for us. There was a very warm reception. In fact, after I gave my second speech in Spanish, they speak a dialect of Spanish called charapa, which is a combination of Spanish and Quechua, which is the kind of Spanish that I learned. That was my introduction, because I've probably told you this, and I won't go through the story again. I got kicked out of Spanish class. I told my teacher I'd never use this stupid language. So I didn't learn Spanish the conventional way. I learned this dialect of Spanish first, and that is charapa. And charapa, by the way, is a turtle. And the reason why they call it the charapa is because they're very sing-song, and they speak slower, and it's, like I said, it's a mix of Spanish and Quechua. It's very comical, actually. So after the introduction of myself and my crew, they offered us some typical food, some of the jungle fare that they eat, which I'm very familiar with, which was boiled bananas and fish and stuff. And then they did that as a show of hospitality. That's the way these communities are in the jungle. They don't have a lot, so they share what they have with you. That's like them inviting you. That's them being hospitable. And it's an offense if you don't eat it. It really is, because it's like they're very poor, they don't have much, and then they offer you what they have, and a lot of gringos turn it away. Oh, no, thank you. You don't say no, thank you to these communities. Yeah. You don't say no, thank you. You eat whatever they give you. And I like it. I like the jungle food. It's fish, and it was fish soup and boiled, they call it ingidi, boiled banana, boiled plantain rather. And then we walked out of the tambo, and they performed this traditional Ikitu dance for us, and it was the ladies, some ladies and guys from the village, and they were dressed in their traditional garb, and they did this dance for us, as a celebration of our arrival. So it was really quite fascinating.
Sounds like a lot of pomp and ceremony. Yeah, you got the red carpet rolled out in the jungle.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to explain, really. This is their version of rolling the red carpet out. And so we had this incredibly warm reception. And then one of the older guys from the village gave us a little speech in Ikitu, which was really remarkable. This is a language that is almost gone. There's under probably 50 people left who speak it, and they're trying to teach it to the younger generation. And it was really remarkable to hear this language that's almost gone from the earth. And then they gave me a bowl of masato to drink, which I also talk about in the little video I made. Masato is I won't go into. If you want to know about masato, go watch that video. But it's a very traditional drink. It's masticated yucca. And when they give you a bowl of masato in the jungle, and you take it and you drink it, it's almost like being inducted into the community. It's very important to them. That's the first thing that happens when you go to one of these communities in the jungle, at least the Peruvian Amazon. I don't know about the Brazilian Amazon, but in the Peruvian Amazon, one of the very first things that's going to happen is that someone is going to hand you a bowl of masato. And now this is definitely something most gringos do not drink because it's masticated. They chew it in their mouth and then they spit it out and mash it and put it in a bucket and add river water and let it ferment.
Jeez.
And
Sounds delicious.
I drink a lot of masato.
Sounds delicious, yeah.
This was the best masato I've ever had. It was, it grows on you, probably grows in you too. But it was a very traditional welcome for us. Doug attempted to drink the masato also, but it ended up all over his beard because he puked it up.
Oh, man.
But as I say in the video, he gave it the old college try.
Good job.
And they appreciated it. They really did. So why am I telling you this? Because once all of this had happened, they were very receptive to us and very willing to talk to us. And it's not always like that in the Amazon. Sometimes people are very closed. Even if you give them stuff, they're very closed communities, but because we approached them in this manner, they were very, very happy to receive us. And they were eager and excited to come up to me one after another and tell me their stories of what they've been experiencing. Okay. So now what is it that these people have been experiencing? Right after that reception, Doug and I got to work immediately, and we started walking around the village. We walked around the village to kind of get a feeling for the perimeters of the village, what this place looks like, how big it is. First thing we noticed, they burned down all the trees around the village. They created 3 to 5 acre radius. Not every tree is burned. There's patches of trees in here and there, but for the most part, and they left those trees for shade. For the most part, they burned this radius around the village because somebody was making incursions from the jungle, and they wanted to create a buffer zone and open up a line of sight. That's the first thing we noticed. And we also noticed that they were planting their crops really close, like almost in town, in the middle of the village and right around town. And that's not usual. Usually these guys all have their chakras out in the jungle, about a 5-10 minute walk out into the jungle. Sometimes more of them 20 minutes. Some of them are more like 20-minute walks into the jungle, but they all have their little plots of land out there. But apparently they weren't going to their land. They weren't going out in the jungle at all. Because they were terrified. And this is what we began to encounter. And then the Apu was taking us to the areas where they were having these confrontations with mysterious assailants. And they began to describe the confrontations and the assailants. And right away, Doug and we actually got a little nervous. Because at first, our initial reaction, interpretation of what we were being told was, these are narcos. This sounds like narcos. This sounds like drug traffickers. And they're really violent, and they're seriously trying to get rid of these people for whatever reason. And when we thought that, we had to go sit down with our security staff and have a conversation, and with the crew on the boat, because that's a very, very serious and dangerous situation to be in the middle of.
That's a cartel. Yeah, I mean,
because you're talking about cartels, and they would have known we were there, and they would have not wanted us there, and we could have run into some major trouble.
Tim, what was the first? What made you off the bat think that? Like, is it
because the phenomenon is very violent, and it's very, as I said before, it's up close and personal. It's not this distant, mysterious, ghostly phenomenon like these strange beings that are just observing these people from the jungle. These are incursions by people who have very bad intentions. Mm-hmm. And that became apparent. So we went back to the boat for lunch. So we heard a couple of testimonies, went back to the boat for lunch because we were living on the riverboat. That was our base of operations, which was harbored at the village. And we sort of assessed what we knew up to that point. And again, we had a conversation with our security, and then we went back into the village and we started to hear a lot more testimonies. And it very quickly became apparent that we are not dealing with drug traffickers. These are not miners, river miners. They do not use jetpacks, and these are not drug traffickers. We understood after lunch, when we went back into the village, it became very apparent to us that we are dealing with something extraordinary and unconventional. That became apparent. Why? Okay, because when we went back into the village, a lot more of the details began to emerge. We had already learned what these guys look like. Almost everybody told us, in fact, everybody told us that they were at least as tall as me, but most people said taller. Some people said a foot taller than me. Like, I was standing in a building and talking to them, and I said, now I want to get an understanding. You're saying they're tall, and obviously it's nighttime and everything, so it's not exactly accurate, but this is their best estimate. You're saying they're tall, so I'm tall. You guys, I'm tall to you. So me, and they're, no, taller than you. Okay, how tall? So I'd put my hand all the way up, and then I put my hand on the ceiling. And I said, this tall? And some of them said, yeah, they were that tall. So we walked away with an estimate of anywhere between 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall, maybe even up to 8, potentially, giving room for some exaggeration. 6.5 to 7. Maybe the smallest guys were 6, my height, but the larger ones, and they really stress this. These are big dudes. These are big dudes, not just tall. They're big. They're big dudes. Okay, and that wasn't super surprising to us. The first encounter, the first few minutes before lunch, when they were telling us about these guys, because if they're gringos, if they're let's say some sort of a international cartel. I said drug trafficking. What I meant to say was human trafficking. That's what we were really concerned with, that these were human traffickers. Drug traffickers too, but really an international cartel of human traffickers is what we were most concerned about. But then we began to hear about the technology that they were clearly deploying in this village. And the technology that these guys are using, there's 3 specific, let's call them technological apparatuses that are showing up in the testimonies of the people in San Antonio. And they're all related, but I want to separate them into 3 things. Number 1, the footwear. I'm not going to call them boots or shoes because they're not boots or shoes. They're wearing very peculiar footwear. And the first thing you need to know about this footwear, and these are the assailants. These are these mysterious assailants. Their footwear's very large. It's huge. How do I know it's huge? Because the villagers have found their footprints. And they're really big, and they consist of 2 circles. So they have discs on the bottom of their footwear. Very strange. And this is something that was stressed to us. No, their shoes are not like any shoes or boots. They're strange. They're very strange. They have discs on the bottom of their shoes. And apparently these discs enable them to float. So oftentimes they're encountered floating by the agency of these discs on the bottom of their footwear. And apparently they're able to leap up into the air. People told us they could jump up over houses or even over trees, we were told.
Wow.
They would leap up into the air to escape. Obviously, there's some sort of a technology being deployed on their footwear. Okay, that's the first apparatus, technological implement that they're using. The second apparatus, technological implement, aside from the discs on their shoes, they apparently can snap into circular platforms. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't want to use the word disc because I don't want to confuse people between the discs on their shoes. It's like
snowboard boots.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
I think they're probably magnetically snapping into like a hoverboard, like a circular hoverboard type thing. They're magnetically snapping into it with these discs on their footwear, on their shoes. When they snap into the boards, and again, I don't know that they snap into them. I'm just assuming if you got these big discs on the bottom of your footwear, that would be awkward standing on a platform. So I'm just assuming that they magnetically lock in. And they may not, but that's the way I think of it. So when they mount the platforms now, these circular platforms, they're about 3 feet in diameter. These guys are they're agile without them, but when they're on these things, they're like supervillains.
Well, sounds like the Green Goblin.
Very much like the Green Goblin, which is what the villagers said. So the difference is that the Green Goblin flies around on this, the Spider-Man villain flies around on this sort of winged apparatus, and it uses jet propulsion, right? And he stands on it like in a wide stance. Don't get that out of your mind. That's not how these guys stand. These guys stand, everyone showed us, they're with their feet kind of close together. Talia said one had a foot kind of just a little bit in front of the other. So they're not hoverboards in the sense that they're not like long boards. They're circular and they're silent. And they have lights. They have lights around the circumference of the board, multicolored lights. They also have floodlights on them. And these guys can zip around through the air at high rates of speed on these things. These circular platforms. I do not believe that the platforms have anything to do with jet propulsion or propellers.
Interesting. For
several reasons. Number one, they're silent, except for when they accelerate. When they accelerate, they make like the way that it was sort of described to me by the villagers is almost like a sound of like compressed air. When you pull a hose out of a compressor, that something like that. But it wasn't really clear what kind of noise it made. But there is a noise associated with them when they accelerate off the ground, because what the assailants do. They fly into the village or to the outskirts of the village. They land on their discs. Their circular platforms. They land these platforms in the clearings, usually behind. Remember, they burned the trees down around the village. So they were landing behind those rows of trees, and then they were dismounting and floating into the village. Now, some villagers said they saw them walking, but most people see them floating. And the ones who saw them walking, I'm kind of thinking that they just imagined that they were walking, right? Because you would never think, if you see somebody at nighttime moving across the ground, your first thought wouldn't be they're floating. It would be they're walking, right? So I think there's some confabulation. But a lot of people see them floating. They're floating around. Now, again, they're off of their platforms, their circular platforms, and now they're hovering on their discs on the bottom of their footwear. These guys remember, they're tall. Well, however tall they are, they're at least as tall as me, probably taller. They're dressed from head to foot in black armored bodysuits, head to foot. So they have black armored bodysuits on, and they have large helmets on, and the helmets are elongated. Everybody was telling me they're elongated in the back. That's, again, a reference to the Green Goblin, his helmet, how it's elongated in the back.
Yeah.
They said that they have their eye lenses on the helmet, so there isn't a separate mask. It's a helmet. The eye lenses are yellow and they're almond-shaped. They're large and almond-shaped yellow eye lenses.
Just like the Green Goblin.
And they have small, hardened backpacks, so small hard shell backpacks. And we've speculated that those might be battery packs, or perhaps small reactors, something like that they're carrying on their backs to generate the energy for whatever kind of technology they're using on their footwear, and also when they snap into the into the platform.
I mean, definitely not camelbacks in case they get thirsty. Probably something a little more advanced.
Yeah, they're camelbacks.
Dude, Tim, this is kind of, I mean, it's wild. Like, the things you're describing it sounds like out of a Marvel movie. It sounds a lot like some of the encounter stories you hear about some UFO technology, right? The silent hovering, the silent moving, and then it's like a mix of sci-fi and Marvel. I mean, we could say that's the same thing. And yet this is what they're saying, like, to a man in the jungle. These people are saying this is not what
super.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
And one guy told me so there's a particular gentleman in the village who he shot one of these guys at point blank range. He showed me where he was and everything. He shot one of these guys and he fell down. I don't know. He was not on a, this guy made it clear to me. He was not on a platform. He was not on one of these hovering platforms. He was hovering off of the discs on his footwear. And when he shot him, the guy fell back on his back. He shot him with a 16 gauge shotgun, bird shot, probably modified bird shot. They modify the BBs in the cartridge to create larger slugs. So he shot this guy. He fell back onto his back and then popped back up.
Wow.
He certainly wasn't hurt. It's just the blast, the force knocked him on his butt. You know what I mean? And then he pops back up and then takes off. I don't know how many guys actually shot them, but a lot of guys shot at them. Some of the other guys in the village would say when they shoot them, they hear the BBs dinging off of their
armor or
suits.
Armor. Like metal, ding, 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 like off of their metal, right? Like the BBs.
Is this
off.
the first time you've ever heard a story of like this hybrid technology where it?
This is the most bizarre thing I've ever investigated personally.
And why?
Yeah,
I guess my other question.
It gets weirder too.
Well, my question is, so like, I mean, it could be. We don't really know. It could be a hybrid of beings too. I mean, it could be humans, or it could be. We don't know. Talked extensively about these alien beings that look a lot like us on our show.
Well, it gets even weirder. So we're departing very quickly now from anything conventional. Again, not just typical human traffickers, not just typical drug traffickers, certainly not miners, river miners with jetpacks, nothing like this. We are out of the realm of conventional technology.
But you can see where where this like rumor kind of.
The police officers created that stupid story. That ridiculous story.
Well, you could see like how if these things are flying in on discs, that could be, someone could just say something flew in on it, and they could, you know how easily it can just be twisted.
Yeah, certainly. Yes. There's no question about it. The first thing that would come to mind if you see somebody floating or flying is a jetpack.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. That would be the first thing because that's the most common. And these guys know all the villagers are well aware of all the technology that's out there. They have the internet.
They've seen Rocket Man. Yeah.
No, these guys are on Facebook and they're on the internet at the Tombo.
Yeah.
Okay. They're not, it's not like you're going to walk into the village with a drone and they're all going to, gather around and think it's like, it's one of their jungle deities coming to visit them. They're not those kind of jungle people. They have the internet. They watch movies. They were pulling up drones and stuff for me on their cell phones. They know exactly what this technology isn't.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I understand the jetpack story a lot more now. You know what I mean? Because like the telephone game, you tell a story to a couple people, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's just some jetpacks flying around up there. But it makes more sense than what you just described. I think this jetpack story gives more validity to what you're describing now, to me personally.
Well, that's not all. Okay. So we've mentioned the first technological apparatus that they're using, which is the discs on their footwear. Then the second, the larger discs, or I'm calling them circular platforms that they maybe snap into magnetically and fly around on. But then there's a third technological apparatus that's being deployed over that village. And this third thing is the nail in the coffin to the jetpack miner story. These guys apparently are flying around in what I would describe as advanced aerospace vehicles, or UFOs. Several of the people in the village drew in the dirt. One of them drew on the chalkboard, on the acrylic board. And I have that on, if you watch the video, you'll see. They drew, and they all drew the same thing. They drew this figure of what I'm describing as being somewhat shaped like an acorn, and they all drew the same thing. They're all seeing the same thing. It's relatively large. It's about the size of a small private jet or a large helicopter like a Chinook or Black Hawk helicopter. It's got this very strange shape, like an acorn. In other words, but longer than an acorn, but with that basic shape. The narrow part is where the cockpit is, and then the rear of this vehicle is the wider part, like the top of the acorn shape. They have these little, they don't have wings, just like what I saw in Brook Park, Ohio. They have these little rounded nubs in the place of wings, and these things apparently they open up. And when they open up, they deploy a series of lights, almost like a scanner, and then they close. And everybody described them the same. Many people saw them in the village. These craft have hovered silently over the village, 30 to 40 feet. They've hovered over people's houses. One guy, and again, this is in the video, one guy was pulling up his nets at 3 a.m. He's pulling up his nets, and suddenly he said it was like daytime. It was like the sun came up. Everything around me was totally lit up. And he said he saw this bright reflection in the water because he's pulling his nets up, and he looks up, and right above him, 30, maximum 40 feet above him, is this craft. So he's looking straight up at it. He's looking at the bottom of it. And he described it just like I told you. It was like an acorn shape. It was like the size of a large helicopter. And it had, he said, he called them bundles, or he referred to these two things you could see in there as bundles, because the craft, I should have said, the craft was totally transparent. Oh. He said it was totally transparent. He could see the structure, but it was transparent. He could see inside of it. And he saw these two bundles, and he said they were two people sitting there inside. And he showed me where they were in the craft, and he draws it on the chalkboard, on the acrylic board. And he's describing exactly what these other people drew in the ground, in the dirt for me. They're totally silent. They have the capability to hover completely still in the sky. They don't make any noise. When they accelerate, they make a low humming frequency sound. They are very bizarre. They have this different kinds of lights on them. But obviously, we're not talking about propellers. The guy is on a boat in the river pulling nets up. The water, I asked him, was the water disturbed? He said, no, not at all. So if these had large propellers, that water is going to be disturbed. Right. He said there was no wind or anything like that. I said, did you see any propellers? No. Did you see any kind of an exhaust, like jet engines? No, nothing like that. He did describe some sort of a wave, almost like it was very strange what he described. When the craft accelerated, there was almost like an exhaust out the back, but it was very strange. I don't even know how to explain it. Obviously, we're dealing with advanced technology, unconventional advanced technology here. Okay, so these are the same dudes. And they always come 2 by 2. There were 2 guys in the craft, and they always come 2 by 2 into the village. I think they come in groups of 2, but they come 2 by 2 every time. 2 guys in the craft, 2 guys coming on the discs. So whoever these things, people, I don't know what to call them except for assailants, because I don't know if they're humans. I'm gonna tell you a story here that might suggest that they are. But whoever these people are, these guys have technology that is vastly superior to anything that any cartel on the planet has. So we are way outside of the realm now of cartels. This isn't about money. When you've got this kind of technology, some sort of anti-gravity technology, when you've got this kind of technology, it's not about money anymore. There's another motive at work here, and it's very sinister. So I've told you about 3 different kinds of technological apparatuses that are being deployed. They're all related. I think they're using the same kind of propulsion, and I do not believe it's propellers. And it's not jets. We know it's not jets. Jets would be very noisy, and they'd be very problematic moving around the jungle. Propellers would be very noisy, even if you have the stealth technology like our helicopters have, right? The stealth helicopters, like the one that crashed at Osama bin Laden's compound, allegedly. Even in that case, you would have some telltale signs of propellers, right? And when you put all of these things together, you realize that no, this is something else. We're dealing with advanced aerospace vehicles. We're dealing with some sort of an anti-gravitical or some sort of electromagnetic technology that is superior to any of these hoverboards that you see online. There's a French guy who made this hoverboard that you can really move on these things. You go 100 miles an hour, you go way up in the air. They fly for 10 minutes. They require a lot of energy. They're remarkable, but they're conventional. They're conventional technology. They make a lot of noise. They cannot display they're not capable of the same kind of technological feats as the things I'm describing to you. This is a level or many levels above anything in the commercial sector. Okay. That's very important to keep in mind. So we learned all of that. We knew we weren't dealing with typical or conventional human or drug traffickers. We weren't dealing with your everyday cartel, your Mexican cartels that do cut people's faces off, by the way, very brutal.
Yeah.
We're dealing with something much more extraordinary, much more mysterious than that. We knew that. And actually that made us feel a little better because it's not about money and violence, because that's what the cartels are about. Mm-hmm. Money and fear. That's what the cartels are all about. And that's very dangerous to be a gringo in that scenario out there in the middle of the jungle. So that we were able to take that off the table right away. Now we're dealing with something very mysterious. So we went on conducting these interviews. Everybody told us the same thing. Everybody told us the same descriptions of the people. One guy, the guy who shot the assailant, he fell on his butt for a second. He told me one discrepancy. Everyone else told me they wear black. They're black. He said this guy was wearing, his body armor was silver. And that's why you had the report initially that they're silver because of him. He said that, no, he's like, I'm telling you, I said, I put my flashlight right on him. It's silver. What he was wearing was silver. So for whatever reason, and I think probably what's going on here is their armor has some sort of a stealth technology built into it. It can go dark and it's probably not dark until it goes into a stealth mode in which it becomes probably almost impossible to see these guys when they're fully in that mode. We have conventional technologies that almost render a person invisible at this point. And so they probably do as well.
I'm trying to put together my thoughts here and phrase them properly, but I think after doing this show for 3 years, you kind of realize that there's human on human atrocities. And then we've talked extensively about how in the Golden Age, there was different realms. There was non-human entities interacting with humans as well. And so you had technologies coming from other realms, other places, different kingdoms, right? And this, we've talked, about they possess technology. They're building this craft somewhere with elements that we don't have. So you have elongated skulls. You have these suits that are almost metallic, and they're flying in on craft. So, I mean, everything to me sounds very much like the beings themselves don't sound human to me. That's my take.
Was it elongated helmet or elongated skull, though?
Elongated helmet, I'm not sure that their skulls are elongated. Their helmets are elongated. No one has seen beneath the helmet. Now, let me tell you the story of Talia. So we conducted a bunch of interviews. There's a lot of things that I haven't told you that we were told. But it was all synchronistic. Everything they told us. Everybody was describing the same phenomenon. When we went to interview this 15-year-old girl named Talia, she's the one who you see in the videos that came out where she's got the two lacerations actually, in her neck. And I had originally reported that that's how the incident began. That's what everyone was saying. That's what the media was saying. But when you go and you actually do an investigation, you can start to get a higher resolution understanding of how things unfolded. And that was not the case. Her incident was not the first. The first incursion happened over at the Tambo. That's a different story. So the reason why I highlight that is because by the time this incident happened with Talia, the village they already knew something was up. They already knew there's these strange, mysterious assailants that are making incursions in the village. There's a high level of vigilance now. It's important to understand that. So everybody's already vigilant. They're sitting out with their flashlights at nighttime. They're ready with their guns and flashlights, okay? This is the context of what I'm about to tell you. This 15-year-old girl, something very traumatic happened to her. And one of my intentions was to interview her myself when I got to the village. That was one of my primary goals, in regard to the investigation. We tried to do it on the second. We spent, by the way, 3 days and 2 nights in the village. We tried to do it on the second day, but it was very sad. Everybody was in the village in the evening. This is what they do in these communities. In the evening, like around 5 o'clock until sundown, all of the villagers are in the plaza. All of the men are playing soccer. All of the women are playing volleyball. That's what they do. And so we go to the plaza. There's the men playing soccer. There's the women playing volleyball. And then there's this girl sitting by herself on a bench up against a house. And it was Talia. And so we were going to approach her with the Apu of the village to interview her. And as soon as she saw us, she's just sort of sitting there by herself, but she's just, kind of happy watching everybody play soccer and volleyball. And as soon as she laid eyes on us, she began to tremble. She started hiding her face with her hand. Then she took her hair and covered her face on this side looking at her, she covered her face with her hair. And she's literally sitting there trembling. And I thought, oh my God, this girl is really psychologically damaged. Something really awful happened to this girl. And I did not expect to find her like that. The chief of the village went over to her and tried to talk to her, to get her to come talk to us. She did not want to. So he went and got her father. And her father came over and we talked to him for a minute. And he went over and he grabbed her by the hand and brought her over. And when she came over to us, she was resisting, pulling against him. When she came and stood in front of us, she was shaking like a leaf, crying, covering her face. She was terrified. And she absolutely would not talk to us. She basically ran away from us. And the Apu suggested, Jairo suggested, why don't you visit her in her house tomorrow morning after breakfast? Visit her over at her house. She'll be ready to talk. And her father told us, he guaranteed us that she'll be better tomorrow. And I said, well, we don't want to further traumatize this girl, but we do want to know what happened to her. And he said, no, come back tomorrow after breakfast. So that's what we did. On the third day, we went late morning, visited her house. We walked back in, and you see this on the footage. We walked back into her backyard. She wasn't there yet. Her father told me the story of what happened. And then eventually Talia showed up. Her father was able to bring her, and she stood before me and trembled for 5 minutes without saying a word, just shaking. By the time we started recording, she had already been standing there just absolutely traumatized, trembling, kind of hiding her face from us. And it was pretty sad. Eventually, I asked her a question. Can she please tell us what happened to her? Because we were standing in the place where it happened. She just trembled for 2 minutes after I asked her the question. And I told her, take your time. I understand what happened to you is very traumatic. We're not the bad guys. Because her assailants were taller than the rest of them. And so she saw us tall. And some of the villagers believe that the FacePeelers are gringos, and others believe that they're non-human, they're extraterrestrial, or they're something else. It's like, and some of them they don't know which of those two things to believe. So Talia maybe is associating her assailants with gringos, and here's 2 gringos now. And how many assailants were there? 2. So she's associating me and Doug. Doug's a big dude. I'm taller than Doug, but Doug's a really big dude. He's a power lifter. He weighs 300 and some pounds. So we are reminding her of her assailants, and she is just trembling. Eventually she begins to speak. She speaks very softly, and she tells this story. And what she says is that she was there right after dark. By the way, these assailants only come right after dark and right after dusk and right before dawn. Right after it gets dark and right before it gets light. That's when they come. And then they see them throughout the night flying over the village on their circular platforms and in their craft. But they make incursions into the village right after dark, usually. And everybody told us that. So, and this is Talia's story as well. She's right after dark, she's picking fruit with a stick out of a fruit tree in her backyard. And that's where we were standing. And this is what she said. She said she knocked a fruit down, hit the ground. She bent over to pick it up. Now there's some dead leaves lying on the ground there. And she noticed that the leaves rustled a little bit, and she felt a gentle wind at her back. So she turned around and she looked, and she saw, the first thing she saw was lights. There was a circular platform lit up, right? So she saw this thing, and then she realized there's someone standing on it. And she showed me how the guy was standing on it. And it was a very tall person, just as I described before, dressed head to foot in black, big black helmet, elongated, black armored bodysuit. And he floated up to her, landed the platform on the ground, and violently grabbed her. And he covered her mouth. And they have gloves on. He covered her mouth with his hand. And then she saw another one. And you have to understand that behind her house, okay, so the context of where this is in the village, this is not on the outskirts of the village. This is kind of in the middle of the village. And in her backyard, there's like a little gully, and it's forested, but then you'll see it in the video. It goes up a little bit. So it goes down, and there's a little chicken coop thing back there, a little thatched roof chicken coop. And then it goes up on this little ridge, and up there are more houses. So it's like in the middle of a bunch of houses. And she sees this second assailant coming up on his platform. He comes whooshing up the hill right next to the other guy, and he grabs her legs. So suddenly she is now being held very tightly by two tall people dressed head to foot in black, large helmets, floating on these platforms. They take her, they float her over behind that chicken coop. And there's here in her story, there was some confusion. I really couldn't get her to clarify. I don't think she really knows. There was some confusion. She said that they wanted to lift her off, take her up into the air, like grab her, snatch her, and take her away, fly her up into the air. That's what she thought. But they were having a hard time, is what she told me. And so they floated her down behind the chicken coop. Now, here's a very anomalous detail that only Talia talked about this. She said that the two assailants were speaking audibly in Spanish. One of them, she called him the gringo. She said he had a accent like you, meaning me. And he spoke broken Spanish. And the other one spoke perfect Spanish. And I even asked her, did he have a accent like somebody from Lima or something? She said, no, he sounded just like us. He spoke like a Peruvian, but I don't know what that means except for she didn't hear an accent. So I'm going to call these two assailants the gringo and the Peruvian. That's what we're going to call them here going forward to finish this story, because that's how she referred to them. Now, let me say right up front, she never saw their faces, and I do not know whether we are dealing, in fact, with human beings, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But so anyway, she referred to them as the gringo and the Peruvian. I mean, as the gringo, and the smaller one was my height. She said he was a smaller one. He was my height, and the taller one was taller than me. They bring her behind the chicken coop, and they proceed to, the first thing they did was they took out some cream and some powder. And the Peruvian guy who had her by the legs took out some cream and some powder and made a little concoction in his hand. And he took out a nasal syringe and sucked up this concoction and shot it up her nose. That's the first thing they did. This was obviously to immobilize her. This was some sort of a narcotic to render her either unconscious or semi-unconscious, to make her docile. Then he took out a larger tube. It was like a large toothpaste tube, and he squirted some cream in his hand. Actually, I think he squirted the cream in the other guy's hand, the gringo's hand. And the gringo, he's holding her mouth. So with one hand, he's getting this cream in his other hand. He takes that hand and begins to smear it all over her face. And as he's doing this, she says that the Peruvian assailant said to him, be careful, don't put too much on her face. It's going to ruin the flesh. And I had her explain that to me. What do you mean? And she said, well, what they were saying was that it's going to cause the flesh beneath the skin to stick to the skin when they try and take the skin off, when they go to cut the skin off, something to that effect. And She was speaking very, very quietly, very nervous. And so then he puts this stuff on her face. Her face instantly goes numb and instantly swells up and goes numb. Then he takes out this little device, the gringo holding her from behind. And it's this, I actually don't know which of them was taking this device out. It wasn't exactly clear. It doesn't really matter. One of them took this little device out, about, 5 inches long. And it was some sort of a blade. And Doug and I think that it was a laser scalpel, but we don't know that for sure. But it was some very fine instrument. And they proceeded to cut her neck. At first, they made an incision in her neck, and I think she began to struggle. And so they restarted, and they began to cut a little bit higher. As they're doing this, in the course of this encounter, she begins to struggle, and she pushes up on the gringo's helmet. She says it wasn't very difficult to lift up. She's starting to push up on it. She really didn't get a good look of what's under it, but she's pushing it up. And one of these two guys slaps her in the face. Wow. And during this struggle, they drop her. And so this gives her a moment to, where the guy's hand is not over her mouth, it gives her a moment of freedom, and she screams at the top of her lungs. And when she does this, remember what I told you, all the villagers are in a state of vigilance already. They've got their guns and their flashlights. When she screams, all the neighbors come running. And her brother hops up. He was sitting on the porch with her dad. He hops up and runs around the house. So they're there in a matter of seconds. They're on scene. And in the interim, she says that she hears these two assailants. The Peruvian says, "Vamos, vamos, let's go, let's get out of here." And the gringo, she said, says, "No, we can't just leave her here. We have to take her." And he proceeds to, according to her, grab her by the hair and drag her on his board, mind you. They're floating. He's dragging her. And then eventually at some point he lets her go, realizing he's not going to be able to get away with her. And at this point, the villagers are on them. And remember, they're sort of down in a gully. So the neighbors are now there with their flashlights. They see Talia laying there on the ground, bloodied up. They see the assailants floating on their platforms. The brothers there's a handful of them on scene. They see these guys at close proximity, the perpetrators. They're at the scene of the crime. And the assailants, they maneuver themselves on their circular platforms. They maneuver themselves to where it's not heavily forested above, and they shoot up into the air and escape. And Talia is left lying there on the ground. And she's in a state of disorientation at this point. And obviously her brother and the neighbors pick her up, bring her in the house, begin to treat her wounds, and her face is swollen. It was swollen for 8 days.
Wow.
And so here now we have a very human feeling phenomenon, albeit with advanced technology. Now we're starting to feel like this is human and very sinister. Now, Talia is extraordinarily traumatized, whereas there is no doubt whatsoever that these assailants were attempting to A, cut her face off, and or B, abduct her, take her up into the air and take her somewhere. We don't know exactly if they were going to lift her off the ground and take her to some other location, but we know they were going to take her face off. They began to cut her neck. They made an incision on the bottom, as I said, and they redid it. They started over. So it wasn't like they were just trying to, and they didn't cut deep enough to kill her. They were cutting just the epidermis, just the skin layer. Like they were going to rip it off. Like they were going to cut it off, her face.
So weird.
And so she's so very traumatized. I think that we're dealing with a little bit of confabulation here. Remember, the communities in the jungle, as I said to you guys last time, the FacePeeler legend is extremely well known. Everyone knows about it in the jungle. Okay? Everybody in the jungle knows about the FacePeelers. When you're a little kid growing up in the jungle, they say, don't go out alone at night in the jungle because a FacePeeler might get you. So it's this well-known legend. According to the legend, there are different theories on who they are. One of the theories is that, as I said earlier, they're gringos, they're organ harvesting or human trafficking gringos. Then another hypothesis is that they're aliens. These two things go hand in hand, or you hear them both all the time. So it's not one or the other, it's both of these things mixed together, right? Nobody knows what they are, but those are the two hypotheses that the villagers have. So in Talia's mind, she may think that these are gringos. She may have already presupposed that the FacePeelers are gringos and then confabulated the speaking. Mm-hmm. And when I say confabulate, what that means is when something happens and you can't remember all the details, which is sometimes the case, and when something traumatizing happens to you and you go into shock. Sometimes people can remember every detail, and sometimes people just can't hardly remember anything because they're just in a state of shock. It becomes very visual, but maybe not so much auditory. And so she may be confabulating the speaking because she was already under the impression that FacePeelers were in the village and they're gringos. You see what I mean? So she might have been confabulating. The other possibility is that she was hearing someone speak, but it was in her mind. It was in her head. Telepathy. That's another possibility. The third possibility is that it was a Peruvian and a gringo. That's the third possibility. She was hearing them speak. But remember, this is an anomaly. Nobody else heard them speak. Nobody. Even the guy who shot the one dude and he fell on the one assailant and he fell on his butt, that guy didn't shout out. He didn't say, ow. He didn't say anything. He didn't get on his radio and say, hey, I'm hit. Nothing. He just say nothing. They don't speak except for this anomaly. And of course, this is a very close encounter she's having, and no one else had this close of an encounter. So either they spoke, either they're a Peruvian and a gringo, okay, speaking Spanish, and the gringo broken Spanish. That's let's call that option A. Option B, they didn't speak at all, and she confabulated them speaking. In other words, confabulation means you fill in the gaps where your memory, there's gaps in your memory. Confabulation is artificially filling in those gaps with what makes sense to you, to your brain, right? That's called confabulation. So she's either really hearing them speak, confabulating, or she's hearing a telepathic communication. She's hearing it in Spanish or something. She's understanding it in some way, and she is then assuming or believing that communication is Spanish and broken Spanish because of her presupposition that these are gringos, right? So those are the three possibilities. I did ask her about the hands. She said they were normal hands, but they had gloves on. There may have been a glove taken off at some point, but she was so unclear on some of these details. It seemed like irrelevant, really, to even ask those kind of questions. This is a very traumatized girl. We know it happened because the neighbor saw it. Her brother saw it. They were there. There's the guys floating on their platforms, escaping, right? There's Talia bloodied up on the ground. So we know they violently assaulted her. We know that they dragged her, floated her behind the chicken coop, like she said. And her dad said she was found closer up on the hill. So she probably was out of it by the time they started dragging her. She was definitely out of it when they found her. So at what point did she pass out? Right after she screamed? I don't know. So the point is that this was a very violent, malicious encounter. They were going to do something horrifying to her, probably cut her face off, and or abduct her and do other things to her before they cut her face off. We don't know. But I can tell you this, that girl, something awful happened to her. And her father, after this encounter, her father took her down to the village that had a better medical post, and they treated her wounds, and they diagnosed her with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And what's really sad is the Apu, Jairo, told me, he said, it's really sad. Talia used to be a really happy girl. She used to be really happy, kind of bubbly 15-year-old girl, normal 15-year-old girl. He said she's ruined. She's ruined. This experience has totally destroyed her psychologically. And it was very sad. Now, I do want to say this. I don't say this in the video, but I do want your audience to know this. Doug and I had the opportunity to pray with Talia. It broke our heart, this girl. It really broke our hearts. And Doug showed her pictures of his daughters that are her age, so she would know that we're not the bad guys. We prayed for her and her father, and I paid for her to go see a psychiatrist in Iquitos, because that was the recommendation from the medical people over in the other village. They said she really needs to go to the psychiatrist and to help her work through the PTSD that she has. So we didn't just come interview this poor girl and walk away. So, and we also prayed with the villagers in general, the men of the village. Most of these men are not Christians or secular and nominally Catholic. I will tell you, though, that they knew we were Christians. I made it very clear to them. And they knew that Christian brothers from the Conduit Church were instrumental in helping provision them. And on the final night, when I prayed for the men publicly, the governor, you have the Apu, who's the chief of the community. He's the highest authority. Then under him, there's a governor, which is kind of like his vice president. The governor is a Christian, and he came up to me and he asked me to please send evangelists to the village. He said, we'll receive them with great joy and hospitality. And he said, please send evangelists. This village is ready now.
That's powerful.
For evangelists to come behind you guys. So, and I did relay that to the guys at Conduit. But so that was Talia's story, and it obviously it's terrifying. And she's not the only one in these jungle villages who's had this experience. Fortunately, Talia, they were not able to do whatever dastardly thing they were going to do to her. But unfortunately, they have succeeded in many cases out in these communities, and people have been found dead with their faces gone. And there was, I think I mentioned earlier, there was a boy recently found in a different village closer to Iquitos with just terrible lacerations, just like Talia, but these were big open wounds. So I don't know if these were the same, or was that a sort of a copycat thing? You know what I mean? Because those wounds were, it's very graphic. Yeah. He survived. Thank God that boy survived, but some don't. I mean, some people just disappear, and then some of them later are found dead with their faces gone. Yeah. And they told me that, by the way, this phenomenon is only 40 years old. It's about a generation old. It's not older than that. I got that very clear from these guys. I talked to them. I talked to the older guys and the younger guys. When did this legend begin? The grandfathers, it was not known to them. Their fathers, it was known to them. So it's about 40 years old. It's one generation old, which is very interesting because what was happening a generation ago in the United States and probably all around the world, we were recovering alien technology, reverse engineering.
Tim, I was going to ask you about that. That's maybe the first thought I had in listening to these testimonies and what you found. I want to know what your best guess. You gave us a few options, and I think what's interesting, the only thing that I'm hung up on in the descriptions, honestly, is the height. It sounds very human to me. Everything about it sounds human. Trying to hypothesize what's happening with the conversation, I think is an important aspect to consider as well. But the fact that they are so tall is the only thing that really keeps me from being like, man, this is definitely human, and human using sort of maybe reverse engineered technology and nefariously. And it also weirdly to me sounds a bit like some of the things that happen in cattle mutilations, which of course are associated with UFO stuff, right? Is the surgical removal of body parts. And I don't know if that may be, a red herring aside, but if you're just to sort of postulate, what do you think is your best guess? Or are you still kind of just like, I don't really.
Well, first of all, I don't know. There's no way to know. I can't say anything definitively, but I will say this. My hypothesis is that what we're looking at is nefarious humans with reverse engineered alien tech. That's my guess. Again, it's just a guess. And potentially working with non-human entities. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But there's other possibilities, mind you. Might these be elongated skull people? Might these be reptilians? Reptilians are described exactly in that manner. They're tall. They're about 6.5 to 8 feet tall. They're somewhere in there, 7.5 feet tall. They're strong.
And then we talked the first time. I thought even like Nordics, because you have that sort of very, very
it could be something like that.
Yeah,
that's right. It could be something like that. Certainly, it could be hybrids. It could be anything. Right. It could be anything. Now, if in fact Talia is not confabulating, and they did speak, one in Spanish and one in English, rather broken Spanish, a gringo, then I would have to say it's very clearly a human phenomenon. It's hard for me to imagine any other kind of. Why would they be speaking Spanish? The only reason they would be speaking Spanish is because they're operating in Peru, and they're part of some of the operators are Peruvians. Now, that's why I lean in that direction. I am assuming, tentatively assuming that Talia did hear them speak with her ears audibly. I'm assuming that that's true. I do not know that it's true. And like I said, it might not be true, but I'm going to assume that it's true and therefore conclude that we're dealing with nefarious human beings. Now, why are they so tall? Well, the first thing is the Peruvians these villagers may be exaggerating.
It's nighttime, right? And you have something on in the air on a platform. Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing is whatever technology is on their footwear might be giving them 6 inches to a foot height.
Yeah.
Right? They're floating. They're on these discs. They don't just float. According to some of the villagers, they walk too and run. But you know what? It's nighttime. I don't know, but that's what they say. It's hard for me to imagine how you run on with these shoes with discs on the bottom, but they found the imprints. And by the way, they set up 9 traps around the village. They set up shotgun traps with just barrels with cartridges in them and a hammer mechanism. And there's a trigger line. And when that line is tripped, the hammer mechanism is triggered and the cartridge fires. They use this for small game, right? Almost all the game in the Amazon is small, and they're usually killing things moving on the ground. So they're usually a foot off the ground, and people get their ankles blown off all the time by these stupid traps. They're very dangerous. It's one of the biggest dangers of walking in the jungle are these traps. They put 9 of them around the village. And in fact, unfortunately, a woman walked into one of the ladies in the village. And it's even worse because they raised the traps up because they weren't trying to catch game. They're trying to catch these assailants, right? They raised them up to where they thought their knees would be. So knee level. So that would be thigh level on one of them, right? So they're trying to take their knees out with these traps. This poor woman walked into one and it blew a hole in her thighs. She survived, but it was pretty ugly. And this happened shortly before we got there. Also shortly before we got there, a guy got bit by a fertile ant and almost died. Fertile ant snake. But so anyway, they would hear these traps going off in the jungle at nighttime. And then they would go the next day and they would see the imprints of these, and the shoes are very large. They're huge. And they would see these imprints. They said it's a shoe, but it's very strange. It's like 2 circles, and you can see it's like a shoe, but very strange. They didn't take any pictures of it. I don't know why, but they were terrified. They're living in a state of terror, not sleeping at night, patrolling the village every night with their shotguns. So I don't know if these assailants were just blowing the traps off for fun, right? Or if they were actually walking into them. But I do know that there was no blood, no shrapnel, no pieces of armor or clothing. They were just walking right through them or blowing them off intentionally. So it's a very physical phenomenon. It's not paranormal. It's definitely not paranormal. And it's not mass psychosis. It's not hysteria. It may be in some of these other villages. It may be in Iquitos, but it's not mass psychosis. This is the first place it started to happen, remember, in recent years. And it never happened before in this village. There's never been a face peeler phenomenon incident in this village before. So again, to summarize, maybe the technology on the footwear elevates these guys 6 inches, right? So that's giving them additional height. Maybe the villagers are just exaggerating. All of them told me they were large. And by the way, again, they didn't just say large up. It was large out.
Big dudes.
And again, reptilians are very large. They're large like that. They're very built. So it could be reptilians. It could be hybrids. It could be whatever. But it also very well could be humans with advanced technology. I don't know. I just don't have enough information to know what it is. There's elements of this phenomenon that seem inhuman and elements that seem very human, like slapping her in the face. But whereas, by the way, this has nothing to do with alien abduction. Right. With gray alien abduction. This is a totally different phenomenon. However, the violence, the slapping in the face, that is well within the realm of the reptilian type activity. Those beings are alleged. I don't even know that those exist for sure, But in the lore, in ufological lore, those beings are very violent and aggressive and
They smell like
angry.
urine.
So all of this does fit the reptilian profile, by the way. So, and we don't know. Reptilians, I don't know how many fingers they have. Maybe they have 5. I don't know. And I think they do have 5 fingers. So wearing gloves, for all intents and purposes, if these reptilians exist the way they're described, if they're wearing head to foot body armor, we wouldn't be able to distinguish between them and a big human being. They would move like us. Because they're bipedal. They've got arms and legs just like us. I do not believe they have tails. They just have this strange scaly skin and their faces are very strange. But for all intents and purposes, if they're fully covered up in bodysuits, they're going to look like big dudes, right? So that's why and by the way, they would have larger feet, I think. Maybe that's why the shoes are larger. So could these be reptilians? Yes. Could they be? They're not grays. They're not small grays. Are they tall grays? I don't know. I don't think they are. But we're not done yet. So I don't know if you guys want to continue. Do you want to continue on this episode, or do you want to put a pin in this and do a part 2 of this when I get back from Guatemala? Because I've got some more.
And Tim will tell you on a boat in Costa Rica the answer.
Yes, that's true. I will.
I think it's also really interesting that no one really did this at this point. Like it's so disingenuous for people just to be like, well, there's you talk to these people that were high-ranking naval officers and military people, and then they poo-poo this whole thing, and you get there and you realize like people have PTSD. They burn down acres around the village. They're setting traps. They all sit and say the same thing. They carry their shotguns. They're on alarm. You have terrified people that move their gardens in the city. There's something really real happening here. People don't do that, because of a hoax or because of nothing, or because they're all having mass psychosis, especially when you have these real, you have this continuity of encounters that line up and really mirror each other or complement each other. And that's what's crazy. And so, yeah, I'm excited about the second part of this episode. This episode's part 2, because I think unwrapping, why the locale, what else found as you dove deeper into this investigation, and maybe how we're supposed to think about this moving forward. Because I think the other fascinating thing, and I think we should talk about this in the second episode, is you're talking about a 40-year phenomena. So as you pointed out, it lines up with the alleged discovery of and reverse engineering of craft. We talk about Bob Lazar, all these things that happened when, and even the whistleblowers. We've talked about, Tim, on episodes with you on our show, where we have whistleblowers coming out saying we've recovered craft and bodies and reverse engineering these, and so that lines up.
Yep.
And but I'm excited to understand why this place, and then 40 years, and how these things, what you've discovered about all of that.
And so just you'll remind me that I'm going to talk about the other incident that we investigated in a different location, but also I want to talk about how we trained the natives and what the villagers and what we left them to help them defend themselves and record the phenomenon. Remind me to discuss at least those 2 things, and then I'll add some additional thoughts. In the meantime, people can go over to my YouTube channel and watch. It's my after action report and analysis. It's a video. There's some footage from the village. There's some footage of the things I'm telling you. You'll see Talia and hear her story. I published it yesterday. It's got 80,000 views already.
Let's go.
It's just, and on Reddit, it's got like 150,000 on Reddit. It's just like going viral. There's a lot of interest in the story. I've got the people from Daily Mail contacting me, the Sun contacting me. Here's something for you guys. I've been contacted, I won't say which shows, but some big shows want me to come on. I'm going to be going on when I get back from Guatemala. But this is the first show I've done.
My man,
talking about
Let's go. And Tim, I was going to say it's a good thing that you're on the not on the business end of the camera. You got good lettuce. You're a good looking guy, so it's good on the other side.
I've got the face lettuce though, like you guys. I'm quite envious of your face lettuce.
You know what? It's maybe it'll sprout.
No, I've got too much. Me and my twin brother, neither of us can grow much facial lettuce because we have Native American blood. And my mother's maiden name was Running. So it was like Running Bull or Running Fast or Running Away, something like that.
Yeah, I love it.
It was like there's some Native American, so it's like mixed in with the Italian. So no, I don't have that ability, which again, I'm quite envious of you gentlemen's robust facial hair.
Thank you.
Hey.
Well, and you're off
Appreciate
you're
that,
off
man.
again to travel, man. When you get back, you're going off to Guatemala. I know you're doing some scouting for a future expedition trip out there.
Actually, in Guatemala, everyone knows that we did that trip in Peru recently.
That's right.
And so I'm out scouting another one in Guatemala to see. Guatemala's closer, it's cheaper, it's quicker to get to, and it's the Maya civilization,
pyramids.
which is Maya. The Maya are very anomalous. And I think that there's some interesting connections to the pre-flood world with the Mayan. So I'm going to go on this little adventure with my son and kind of do a dry run of what a trip would look like. Maybe a blurry trip.
Hey, baby. Hey.
And speaking of blurry trips, we got 5 tickets left to our VIP. So that's it.
Yeah, come to Costa Rica, February.
That's going to be. I'm super excited for Costa Rica. That's going to be great. It's not a big, huge group of people. It's not a big conference crowd. It's only 150 people. It's very intimate, and it's going to give us an opportunity, both you guys and me, to talk about some things that we don't often talk about on, or in my case, ever talk about on podcasts or publicly. I'm going to be telling a story, one of the stories from the jungle that's related to this incident that everybody wants to know about. I don't have time to tell the whole entire thing, but I'm going to tell one or two incidents that happened that are related to that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And we only got a few spots left on the VIP is going to be great. It's a sunset catamaran VIP trip. And we got this whole catamaran to ourselves, and we're going to be looking for whales and snorkeling and going to a private beach. And then afterwards, going to like a beach restaurant and all of us just hanging out for the evening. It's all, obviously all inclusive, and you get your admission, your event admission when you sign up for the VIP. So you get your ticket to the event as well. So
yeah. So if you're listening in Kazakhstan right now and #1 show in nature, and you'd like to join us, his trip is very nice, and Nate may be wearing some very Kazakh swimwear on the boat. So
that's right, neon orange going for it.
Hey Tim, we're grateful, man. We're glad you came back safe. Always the best to have you here with us, and
thanks for sharing your story with us first, man.
Yeah, man, it means a lot, dude. Yeah.
Well, I know that a lot of people in your audience are praying for us and thinking about us and sending us emails and messages on Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account, on Twitter and Instagram and
MySpace.
And I really appreciate MySpace. Yeah, I was getting a lot of MySpace action.
Everyone in the Blurryverse has got Tim in their top 7.
From the 25 people that are on MySpace.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was a lot of danger involved, and there was, an element of danger. And I appreciate everybody's prayers, and I want to thank Doug Thornton for accompanying me. Doug was awesome. We're going to talk about what Doug did. Doug had a special role to play in this whole thing, which we'll talk about in the next in the next episode. And again, I want to thank again Jamie Brandenburg, Darren Tyler, Todd Smith, and the group of guys, the awesome group of guys from Conduit Church, and all of you guys from Conduit Church listening to this. That village is primed. They're primed for the gospel of Christ. We went in and we planted the seeds. Now somebody needs to go in to water and harvest, and I can help with the logistics of that. So, anyway, thanks for having me on, guys, to talk about this. Thanks for having me on before I went. That was important for us to make sure we had the exposure. Yeah. So everybody knew what we were doing, and I already explained why that was important for us. So when I get back from Guatemala in 10 days or so,
Part 2,
I might have some more blurry stories to tell after I get back from Guatemala.
It never ends.
When I get back from Guatemala, and I will talk about because I am visiting the Mayan ruins, so maybe we'll mix a little bit of that in that conversation too. Don't
step into a portal, Tim. We need you back. So
no, that's how I'm getting there. I don't fly in airplanes anymore.
Send it on over here. We'll come.
Ever since we discovered that portal in Peru, I quit flying on airplanes. I just use the portals.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of your luggage when you left Peru. You had this
sometimes
round disc shape.
Sometimes I go through the portals and I got somebody else's luggage on the other side, and so I'm wearing somebody else's clothes.
Yeah. The one in Peru smelled like urine, but it still it worked just fine.
You know what the secret is to open those portals? It's not what everybody else says.
No,
it's
it
not
isn't.
like, frequencies, and it's not like Bigfoot's screaming or something. It's my pachos.
It is.
Oh, just there it is.
It's my
Dude,
pachos.
hey, you leave him out for the guy with the stump leg, and he opens up the door for you.
That's an inside joke, and people will have. You have to come to Costa Rica to figure out.
Yeah,
what we're talking
that's
about.
right. And that's how we do it here on Blurry Creatures. We have a 1 hour Tim Alberino episode in 2 hours. That's how we do it.
Exactly. Yeah, those 2 hours went by fast. So
This is loaves and fishes, man. We just multiply the hours here. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Tim.
All right,
Good to see you, bro. Hey, say hi to the fam. Tell Jasmine and the
buddy.
kids said hey. Yeah.
likewise.
All right, bro. We'll do.
All right.
Hey, Nate, say hi to your squirrel.
He's gone.
Dude,
But I'll
him
say
and
hi.
Nate had a fight, man. They're not on speaking terms right now.
Yeah, he bit me last
Bad
time I
blood
saw him.
between.
Yeah, he's
Man, Nate's
biting.
got issues with these animals.
Dude,
don't like
seriously. He's
Let's keep Nate. It's not a good idea to take Nate to Guatemala. I don't think. We're gonna have a monkey incident.
dude, any kind of animal life that's around, you can guarantee
Come
it's
on.
not gonna like Nate. So
I don't know.
he's probably good repellent for things like Dogman and Bigfoot, because the animals just don't want to be around him.
They don't want to be around.
Anyway,
They don't want to be here.
well,
All right, Tim.
Tim, good to see you,
All right,
bro.
gentlemen.
buddy.
Thanks a lot, and
Yeah, brother.
I'll see you on the other side of Guatemala.
Sounds good.
All right.
Be good.
See you soon.
See you, bro.